One of the greatest treasures of our Catholic faith is the gift of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Our Lady continues to play a significant role in the Church today. My next guest shares his profound experience, how the Blessed Mother impacted his life so deeply that he converted to Catholicism. My name is Raymond Valiente, host of the Reignite Your Faith series. My next guest, Roy Schoeman, was born and raised Jewish, whose German Jewish parents fled Nazi Germany. He received his bachelor's degree at MIT and an MBA at Harvard Business School, where he taught as a professor in marketing. He's a speaker and author, and written such books such as Salvation is from the Jews, The Role of Judaism in Salvation History, and Honey from the Rock, 16 Jews Find the Sweetness of Christ. He's frequently featured on EWTN and hosts a weekly radio show on Radio Maria. I hope you enjoy this next interview with Roy Schoeman. Roy, thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, thank you so much. It is our honor and pleasure to have you today. You acknowledge a lot of your Jewish roots to Catholicism, to your conversion today. Is that true?
I'd go further. I consider myself a Jew in the Catholic Church.
A Jew in the Catholic Church.
The Catholic Church is the continuation of Judaism after the coming of the Jewish Messiah, who you know as Jesus Christ.
That's right.
It's one plan of salvation divided into two phases, a preparation phase, which we know of as Judaism, and a fulfillment phase, which we know of as the Catholic Church and her sacraments.
Can you share with us a little bit how your journey began to where you got up to this point in your life?
Sure. As you mentioned in the introduction, I was born and raised Jewish. And I was quite devout growing up, but I lost my faith in God at university and went on and was quite successful being a professor at Harvard Business School. But basically without any God, there was no meaning to life. There was no purpose really to anything. You know, we live for 80 or 90 years and we die and that's it. There's no pattern to anything that happens. There's no meaning to life at all. And at this point, when I was a professor at Harvard Business School, the problem was that I could no longer imagine some future success, which would give my life meaning because I was already more successful than I expected to be. So in that, I fell into a kind of existential despair. And I was walking in nature early one morning. And I had an experience that I didn't know even existed because as a growing up Jewish, I had no idea of the concept of mystical experiences. As a matter of fact, one of the questions I used to bother my Jewish religious education teachers with growing up is why did God used to perform miracles in the Old Testament and no longer does today? So, anything supernatural was completely out of my realm of awareness. But I fell into this very particular state of consciousness. Really, the veil between earth and heaven disappeared, and I found myself in the presence of God in a very intimate state of communication and intimacy with God, and seeing my life and understanding everything in my life as I would after I died, and was looking back over my life in the presence of God. And I saw how I would ever understand everything then. And therefore, in this experience, I came out of this experience knowing many, many, many of the truths of the Catholic faith. I knew all about divine providence. I knew that everything that ever happened to me had been the most perfect thing that could be arranged, coming from an all-knowing, all-loving God. I knew that every action had a moral content that's recorded for all eternity, that every time we take advantage of an opportunity to do something of value in the eyes of heaven, we will very literally be rewarded for it for all eternity. Every time we don't, it'll be a lost opportunity for all eternity. I saw that we live forever. I saw that the way we live forever, let's say, is a result of how we spend our time on earth. And the most profoundly affecting part of this experience was coming into the full knowledge and experience very, very personal knowledge of me and love for me. So he not only knew my name, which is a totally alien concept from within Judaism, not only, he not only had been arranging everything that ever happened to me to be the most perfect thing that could have been arranged coming from an all-knowing, all-loving God, but he also knew how I felt at every moment and cared about how I felt at every moment, as though I were the only person he had ever created. And in such an intimate and personal way that in a very real sense, everything that made me happy made him happy, and everything that made me sad made him sad. That was by far the most profoundly affecting part of this experience. Of course, I knew that the meaning and purpose of my life was to worship and serve my Lord and Master and God, who was revealing himself to me. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what religion this was. I couldn't think of it as the God of the Old Testament that I had grown up with within Judaism. So I prayed on the spot, let me know your name so I know what religion to follow to worship and serve you properly. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Krishna and I have to become Hindu. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan, as long as you're not Christ and I have to become Christian. I very literally prayed that. He didn't reveal his name to me. I wasn't ready to hear it, obviously. But I went back home happier than I had ever been in my life. I knew there was never any reason to be anxious about anything, that absolutely everything that happens is the most perfect thing that could be arranged. I knew that life has this infinite meaning because every moment has the potential of doing something of value in the eyes of heaven, for which we will be rewarded for all eternity. And I had a sense of the unimaginable, uninterrupted bliss that awaits us if we play our cards right in this relatively short period between birth and death. So there you have the first theophany, the first part of my experience that turned me from a Jewish atheist to extremely religious in my orientation, and actually very much in love with Christ, although I did not yet know that. Well, after that initial theophany, I went back home, as I said, happier than I had ever been. All I wanted to do was pursue this experience and know who this God was and know how to worship and serve him properly. As a matter of fact, I pretty immediately lost interest in teaching Harvard MBAs how to make a little more money, which basically eventually brought about the end of my time at Harvard Business School. They eventually noticed that my heart wasn't in it anymore. But, well, there were two things I did. One, which wasn't very prudent, was I had just had a mystical experience. I had never heard of a mystical experience. What do you do if you have a mystical experience and you want to find out more about it? You go find a mystic to talk to, which wasn't a very prudent thing to do in a university town in the 1980s. It's never a very prudent thing to do. I found this mystic to talk to who basically put me on some pretty bad kind of new agey, guru-oriented kind of stuff. I wasted a few months with that. But I did something which did bear fruit, which is after that first experience, every night before going to sleep, I said a short prayer before going to sleep that I had made up just to know the name of my Lord and God and Master who had revealed himself to me in that earlier experience. And a year to the day after that first experience, I went to sleep after having said that prayer. And I fell asleep and I thought I was woken by a hand gently on my shoulder. And I was led to a room and left alone with the most beautiful young woman I could ever imagine. And I knew without being told that it was the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I was obviously just overwhelmed when I found myself in her presence. I was overwhelmed by her visual beauty. I was more overwhelmed by just being the presence of the love that flowed from her was to be lifted up into a state of ecstasy greater than I ever imagined could exist. And more profoundly affecting than the beauty of the way she looked was actually the beauty of her voice. And when she spoke, the only way I can describe it is her voice was made up out of that which makes music music.
Mm.
And when she spoke, this incredibly beautiful voice just flowed through me, carrying with it her love and lifting me up into the state of ecstasy. So when I found myself in her presence, all I wanted to do was throw myself on my knees and somehow honor her appropriately. I didn't know how to do that. In fact, the first thought that crossed my mind was, oh my goodness, I wish I at least knew the Hail Mary so that I could somehow honor her appropriately, but I didn't. The first thing she said to me was she offered to answer any questions I might have for her. The first question I kind of wanted to ask her was to teach me the Hail Mary, but I was too proud to admit that I didn't know it. So as a kind of indirect way of perhaps getting her to teach it to me, I asked her what her favorite prayer to her was. Her initial response was a little bit indirect. It was, I love all prayers to me. But I was a little bit pushy. Remember, I was a Harvard Business School marketing professor. Right. So I said, but you must love some prayers to you more than others. And she relented and she recited a prayer to me. It was in Portuguese. I didn't know Portuguese. All I could do was make the effort to remember the first few words phonetically. And the next morning when I woke up, I immediately wrote them down phonetically. And then later, when I met a Portuguese Catholic woman, I asked her to recite the Marian prayers in Portuguese. And to the best of my ability, I identified it as, O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us, have recourse to thee. I asked her about 4, 5, maybe 6 other questions, which she graciously answered. Then the audience ended eventually. And I went back to sleep. And the next morning when I woke up, I knew it had been Christ in that first experience. And I really knew who the Blessed Virgin Mary was, because in this experience, I actually saw how she is the channel between divinity and humanity, that all of the grace that flows from divinity into humanity flows through the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I saw that in this experience. So the next morning when I woke up, I knew I wanted to be as fully and completely a Christian as possible. I knew it had been Christ in the first experience. I knew who the Blessed Virgin Mary was. I still didn't know the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic. And there wasn't much I could do other than open the local phone book to find a church to go to, which was a Protestant church.
Right.
But as soon as I got to know the pastor a little bit, I kind of shyly asked him about the Blessed Virgin Mary. And when his answer didn't reflect the respect that I knew that she deserved, I knew this is no place for me. And so basically, knowing who the Blessed Virgin Mary was led me pretty directly into the Catholic Church.
When did you officially enter into the church?
I was baptized in January of, I believe it was 1992. It might have been 93, but I think it was 92.
So more than 28 years? Yeah. How's that journey been since being baptized, and now how's the journey been as a Catholic?
Well, it's been all downhill. I'm sorry. Not really, but the extraordinary graces that led me into the church were to lead me into the church. They weren't to keep me intoxicated for the rest of my life.
Sure.
So I've become a normal Catholic, so to speak, meaning that I don't get to see the Blessed Virgin Mary all the time. I don't get tremendous consolation in prayer. And that's what I'm jesting, but that's what I mean by, it's something all downhill.
Sure.
It's changed everything. And I would say there are 2 dimensions along which it changed everything. One is, even in the state of just being an ordinary Catholic, please God, perhaps from time to time in a state of grace, I still have a much more intimate relationship with God than would otherwise be possible, and certainly that I ever had before entering the church. There is still the sense from time to time of the presence of Christ in prayer in front of the Blessed Sacrament at Mass. There is still sometimes a sense of consolation and maternal love and protection from the Blessed Virgin Mary, and so forth. So that is huge, and it changes everything. But almost equally important, and I don't think Catholics are sufficiently aware of this sometimes, is the teaching of the Catholic Church. Because before I became Catholic, certainly before I had these experiences, there's no answer. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering if you haven't done something wrong? Why should we be good? That used to bother me. I used to feel a conscience. I want to be good. I want to be kind, but I couldn't think of a rational reason, actually. If we're all just a chemical accident anyway and nothing really matters in the long run, why not be selfish? But all the answers are there in the teaching of the Catholic Church. What to do, the fact that suffering doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. Suffering means that maybe you've gotten a little bit too close to God. Because, of course, the closer one is to God, the more redemptive suffering he asks you to take on for the redemption of humanity. And you know the value of it. We know that, however unpleasant our experience of the moment might be, what awaits us in eternity is going to more than make up for it. We know where to go when we're suffering, or even when we're in despair or desolation or whatever, to go to prayer. We know the seriousness of sin. So first of all, we know what we shouldn't do. And when we do them, we have a recourse to remove the stain, so to speak, to go to confession and get absolved and do the penance and so forth. All of that stuff. So it's not only the experience of God and the relationship with God that we have as Catholics, it's also the answers to all of the questions that torture the human soul and don't have answers outside of the Catholic Church.
Well, beautiful. It just the fact that, yes, suffering is ultimately it's a mystery that we won't fully understand. But when we're able to unite it with Jesus, there is, like you said, redemptive value for the salvation of souls.
And we know that it doesn't mean that God isn't paying attention.
God's always there. There were two things that you mentioned about the end of the life. I heard at a talk once that you gave, that were two things that you at the end of your life, that you were something to the fact that you were not loved. And what was the other one?
Yeah, the other was, I was completely selfish, right? In those days, I was, as I said, a Harvard Business School professor. It's all about selfishness. During this experience, my nature, or my, I don't know what to say, my fallen human nature, my personality didn't change overnight. I was still completely selfish. The difference was that in this experience, I didn't see what was wrong with being selfish. What I saw was that all my life I had been stupid and selfish because I had been putting all my effort into things that wouldn't do me any good at all, even 100 years later after I was dead. And the only thing that made sense, if I wanted to be smart and selfish, was to try to gain as much merit in heaven, essentially to try to be as great a saint as possible. So in that light, which isn't the world's best light, but is not the world's worst light either, right? Because even if you're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, it's better than not doing the right thing. I saw that my two greatest regrets after I died would be, number one, all of the time and energy I had wasted worrying about not being loved, when every moment of my existence I was held in this ocean of love, greater than I ever imagined could exist. But the other great regret would be every hour I had wasted doing nothing of value in the eyes of heaven, because it was an opportunity, to add another $10,000 to my heavenly bank account.
I want to go back to the Blessed Virgin Mary, because I know she's played such a significant role. You had a vision and you spoke to her. How, even as a Catholic now, how does she continue to play a role in your life?
Well, first of all, I'm sure she plays a much larger role in my life than I'm aware of. Because even if we don't live up to the potential of our end of the relationship, she, of course, lives up to her end of things. I certainly try to start every day with a prayer of consecration to the Blessed Virgin Mary. I use the short form of Louis de Montfort's prayer to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And, I certainly try to pray the rosary every day. In principle, I pray the rosary every day. It doesn't mean that there aren't days when I forget that I haven't completed it or something. I guess I have recourse to her. I remember one. I'm not a good role model, okay, for these young adults out there. I mean, in other words, I'm not presenting
But you're
myself.
doing your best.
I was actually climbing a mountain. It was the mountain behind La Salette in France, a shrine to the Blessed Virgin Mary, which was very central to my conversion. It's high in the Alps. It's far above tree line. And I was climbing a peak behind the sanctuary and way above tree line, just snowfields essentially, which kind of turned into ice fields because the snow tends to melt, even though it's cold, in the brightness of the sun and then freeze again near the end of the day and become glazed over. I had climbed up there with a friend of mine who was I hate to say it, a very holy monk and priest, and was rather cautious by nature. He was a monk in a monastery, right? So we climb up, and of course he's taking the circuitous route, avoiding the possible ice, basically. Taking a conservative route, climbing up where the snow was definitely snow, and then going across the ridge to the top so that there would be no risk of, slipping. We get to the top, it's the end of the day, it's 4:00. I've been putting up with his conservatism, for 3 hours. I just want to get back down,
Right.
So he's taking the same safe route, and I figure I'd take a little shortcut. So I kind of start cutting across what turned out to be iced over snow. And I go down a little bit, and it's getting icier and icier, and I can no longer go back up because it's too icy to get a grip going up. And I can't even take another step down because at this point it has become like total ice. So I'm just caught in the middle of this ice field with probably, no exaggeration, 2,000 feet of sheer glaze going down at 40 degrees until it hits tree line, by the way. I can't go up, I can't go down. I'm hanging on to a ski pole that I've jammed through the ice, but I can't hang on there forever. I can't move, I'm just lying there. So what do I do?
Oh,
I kind of scream, Mary, and I let go, right? Because I'm gonna have to let go anyway. And I slide down this whole field. The priest, his Father Pierre was his name. He's seeing this from the side. He's sure I'm dead. I get up to probably, God knows what, 60 miles an hour, and I start bouncing among the trees. And he came down to find the dead body. But, he got down the safe way and came across to find the dead body. And I just banged up a shoulder badly. I mean, not terribly badly, but just a few months before, my arm worked properly. So that was my prayer to Mary, just kind of screaming, what do I do now?
Name.
In other words, what can you do except say, Mary. Help me, and then proceed. So it's not the best example of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, but
when you call her,
mine.
Yeah, when you call out to her, she is truly a loving mother that is there, who is our hope and there to rescue us.
Yes, even somewhat wayward sons do something foolish.
With the Blessed Mother, a lot of people, when I talk to them, first, like from the outside perspective, like especially with the Protestants, they think that we worship Mary, which we don't. We just give her honor.
We know that, I believe it's the fourth commandment, to honor thy father and mother. We know how deeply Jesus honors his mother. We know about the wedding feast at Cana, where Jesus apparently didn't want to turn the water into wine, but did so because the Blessed Virgin Mary asked him to. And we know lots of other incidents recounted by the saints where the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary apparently changed Jesus's mind. We know the role of the Queen Mother in the Old Testament. I think it is Solomon who had his Queen Mother by his side and basically obeyed her when she, counseled him or asked him to grant certain favors. And so it's actually dogma, although it hasn't been formulated as a dogmatic statement, that Mary is the mediatrix of all graces. She is, as I saw in that experience, a channel, a conduit, a pipeline through which all the graces that flow from divinity into mankind flow. They all flow through her. We know this. We know this from dozens and dozens of statements in papal documents, statements by saint popes, and statements by saints, that God has willed that nothing that passes from God to mankind earned by the merits of Jesus Christ should pass to mankind other than through the hands of Mary.
Is there any advice that you can give, words of wisdom that you can give to a young adult today?
Looking back on myself, I would say you may think you're going to live forever, because it might feel that way when you're 25, but you're certainly not going to live more than another 100 years. You're not going to live past 125. However, you actually are going to live for all eternity. You're 100 million years from now, you're not even going to be at middle age, okay? Forever is a long time. We have this very short period on Earth of maybe 100 years or so, which is going to determine our eternity. There was a wonderful priest, also a monk, Father Peter Fellner, Peter Damien Fellner, a big man, a very deep voice. And he used to always say, when he said grace at meals, he used to always say, remember, life is short and eternity is long. So it's a little bit foreboding, but the good news is that every hour we can be building up treasure in heaven. And that is what we're on earth for 100 years for, essentially, is to ensure our eternity. So that doesn't mean don't have fun. It doesn't mean don't get married and raise a family and have a good job and get a motorboat or go skiing or whatever you like to do. But it does mean that underneath that all, the fabric of all of that is that this is the time, this very short period of time in which you are building up all of the treasure you're going to have for all eternity.
Amen. Thank you for that and that words of wisdom. If people want to get a hold of you or find you and get more information, where can they best find you?
I have a website, salvationisfromthejews.com. That's from John chapter 4. That's the words of Jesus. It's also the name of my first book, Salvation is from the Jews. So the website is salvationisfromthejews.com. And I have a YouTube channel. I have a Facebook page, which I don't really stay on top of that closely. I have a weekly radio show on Radio Maria. You can listen to it on radiomaria.us or the Radio Maria smartphone app. It's Saturdays, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a live call-in show, so you can also call in with questions.
But before I let you go, what we do with all our guests is for them to get to know you a little better. What we do is we ask some fun questions. Okay, your favorite hobby is?
Well, my favorite hobby used to be downhill skiing. God asked me to give it up because I lived for it. It really was my God. And in other words, there's nothing wrong with downhill skiing, but it had a disproportionate place in my value system, and he asked me to give it up. That was really the only thing. That was the only thing I was really passionate about.
If you could have a cup of coffee with one saint, who would it be?
The Blessed Virgin Mary.
The Blessed Virgin Mary. Very nice. If you had the gift of bilocation, where would you bilocate to?
Heaven.
Heaven. And if there was one public figure to share your ministry and to share the gospel with, who would that be?
I think it would be Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Okay.
Yeah,
Very good.
I have a profound profound respect for him.
All right. All right, Roy. Other than that, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and sharing your story and sharing a little bit about the Blessed Mother. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And to all our guests, thank you once again for being with us today. And then we'll see you on the next episode. God bless you.